From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hello everybody. I think we'll go ahead and get started. I want to welcome you all here to the 18th in our series of talks on topics in preservation science. Today I'm really delighted to have Sarah Soderman here. She'll be talking about a summary on research on magnetic media deterioration since 1995. This is such an important topic. I just got back from the IFLA conference well, part of it was in the Arctic Circle, where it was extremely hot. I was there for seeing their cold storage system, but even that was warm because they just used natural, the ambient temperature, and they were having a heat wave. And nothing in Scandinavia seems to be air conditioned, so it was really kind of a surprise. I would recommend investing in air conditioning in Scandinavia in the future. But this topic came up quite a bit. Magnetic media, of course, is extremely important material, which has a lot of problems that are unknown to us. There were several sessions devoted to the topic. We are having here, in fact, we plan to have possibly a proposal next year to look at doing some diagnostic analysis of magnetic media, looking at sticky shed syndrome and that sort of thing. So it's a very important topic, and I'm really, really happy to have Sarah here talking about it. Sarah is the best person to speak about this topic in this country. She is a graduate of the program at Buffalo State College in art conservation, but she did a number of internships at Yale and at Princeton and one at the Smithsonian Institution, which we were very lucky to have her, and which is where she started to specialize in this area. She did a special study at Videopex on Smithsonian-funded monies, and during that process, she put together the fabulous website that some of you may be familiar with, which talks about audiovisual materials and extinction of those materials and identification of those materials. So she's really quite well versed in this. So I think without further ado, I'll just say that she is now preservation manager for the Smithsonian Institution Archives. That's a very big job. It involves not only working with that one institutional archives, but with actually there are about 14 archives at the Smithsonian, so she advises all of those people, and I believe she's also now running the research libraries and archives collections conservation task force, which we call RELAC, and that's also another big program there that involves about 150 preservation specialists throughout the Smithsonian Institution. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah, and please join me in welcoming her here today.
Yeah, give me my notes, please. Thank you so much, Diane. All right, well, I'm really pleased to be here today. I think there's some people in this room who will have a better understanding of some of the issues than I do, and there are some people for whom this is a new topic. I hope to cover a lot of ground in my presentation here. The deterioration of magnetic media has confounded a generation of archivists and librarians, and some scientists too, entrusted with the care of audio and videotape. This talk is going to summarize past major points of research prior to 1995 and show research directions and the development of tools since 95 to assist collections managers. I will describe some research initiatives that have the potential to add new layers of understanding to the problem of magnetic media deterioration and its recovery. And the reason I've selected the year of 1995 is because this is the year of the seminal publication on magnetic tape entitled Magnetic Tape Storage and Handling, which was published by the National Media Laboratory and the Commission on Preservation and Access, which is also now known as the the Commission as CLEAR. Council of Library and Information Resources. As Diane mentioned, I'm a paper conservator by training, and I became involved with research in magnetic media when I was a fellow under Diane at the Smithsonian in 1997. At the time, there were few tools available to caretakers of this media. And I remember reading a brochure from the AIC, which on the care of videotapes, that said in the event of some very difficult problems that you should consult with a conservator. And in fact, there were virtually no conservators who knew anything about videotape or audio tape at that time. And so the little conundrum there. And now I actually, looking about, I realized 10 years later that there are still strikingly few, and probably most of them are in this room. I spent a summer as an apprentice photographing videotape formats at Vidipax, which is a company in New York that restores obsolete videotapes. And the reason I spent time just photographing these tape cassettes was because people just didn't even know what they had. They looked at a 1/2 inch EIAJ, or they looked at a 3/4 inch U-matic. We'll get into what all these things are. They were befuddled by that, and they needed to have some sort of guide that would be easily accessible to them. So I created a website called Video ID. And at that time, I met with lots of pioneers in videotape restoration. And then I became a Vidipax employee, and I worked as a conservation consultant to cultural institutions with videotapes. And so I began to see there was an overwhelming need for trained conservators, in addition to the tape experts and the engineers and the technicians, to build the tools that were needed to preserve these collections. And finally, I am now in charge of preservation for all of the collections at the Smithsonian Institution Archives, including the videotapes and audio tapes. And as an end user, I am constantly searching for the tools that will help me balance all of the preservation needs of paper, photo, film, and magnetic media. So this is a summary of research done before 1995. As far as I'm concerned, there are some others, but these are really the important papers discussing the difficulties that people were beginning to see with what is really pretty much a new medium. It's only really been around for about 70 years at this point. So, in my view, the research done since these papers and the magnetic tape storage and handling publication falls short of the needs of the cultural community. Many of the questions generated by over these 2 decades of research are still unanswered. And this is the document that sort of summarizes the pre-1995 work. There's still the same vague assertions about tape lifespans and storage environments, while genuinely useful tools, such as an accurate diagnosis of sticky shed, is elusive and under-researched. So this is a very quick overview of what magnetic tape storage and handling said. Most tapes have a lifespan of 10 to 30 years. When you've been able to determine that 12% of your binder has hydrolyzed, handling of tapes is important to maintaining life expectancy, and visual examination is key to determining risks. But so what is the sticky shed? For those people who are familiar with it, this is just a review. Sticky shed is the generic term applied to what happens when your tape won't play back in your tape machine. And what you'll see that the bolded definition is that a sticky tape can exhibit sticky shed, literally falling off of the tape carrier, produce head clogs, that's head clogs in your playback machinery, and result in stick-slip playback, which means that your tape is no longer tracking in your tape, therefore not being able to be read correctly. And in extreme cases, seize and stop in the tape transport, probably gumming up your machine to the point where you're going to have to spend quite a bit of time getting out the debris. And I should just say that if you are thinking about an obsolete format, and you're talking about a machine that has never been, that is perhaps in limited numbers, you don't want to be exposing your machine to a tape that has these sorts of problems, because you're also dealing with a machine which is vulnerable and needs to be preserved. So sticky shed is a big problem also for the playback machines. So when the National Media Laboratory did publish this magnetic tape storage and handling, it described proper handling of tapes, proper wind, appropriate storage, and a general predictor the tapes will last from 10 to 30 years. And so this document has been a primary resource for collections managers for the past 10 years, so it's been a decade, and has spurred migration efforts from tape, or to disk, or to other mediums such as computer hard drive. So here are the basic guidelines offered by the publication, a little bit deeper review. So you replace, for each guideline, I think there's possibly one or more questions generated. Replace your tapes every 10 to 30 years. Again, this 12% factor is of your binder being hydrolyzed is something that comes from a 1993 publication. Store it at 59 degrees Fahrenheit and 40% relative humidity. If necessary to retrieve data from a tape, you can bake it. Sort of very general guidelines for baking. If you look at a tape, you'll be able to identify how good it's going to look when you're actually playing it back. So if you're looking at a tape cassette, there's a list of data points that you can basically say, well, this tape is going to play back better than, say, this tape. And so here are some of my questions that immediately come up. So when do you know that 12% of the binder is hydrolyzed? Why can't tapes be frozen? And in this publication, because as many of you know, we freeze a lot of materials that are similar to videotape. We seem to freeze a lot of negatives. We freeze microfilm, especially because of the research showing that those types of materials have great benefit from being frozen and give 500 to 1,000 years life extended if you can freeze them. So wouldn't freezing be at least useful if you were very concerned about this sticky shed? What are the long-term effects of baking, one way or the other? If you bake a tape, what would be the perfect amount of baking to do to get back the proper playback? What if it means that you'll never be able to play the tape again? What if it means that actually baking is a great way to preserve your tapes for another 15 years? What's going on with baking that we need to study? And I think that even though it's true that when you look at a cassette tape or a reel-to-reel tape, you can make some determination about how well it will play back, we really don't. I think that there was a sense that by looking at the tape, you could also identify sticky shed by just looking at a tape, and you can't. So I think that sort of implication was within the document, whether or not a careful reading would have actually told you that, that's the case. I think that was an implied problem. So here is my sense of the landscape of magnetic media in 1995. That we had physical deterioration and that it was real. I will be talking about the very specific mechanisms in just a minute. And the kind of things that people what kind of tools, and of course in preservation science, we're always trying to find the right kind of tool to diagnose problems. Some tools seem to lead to one conclusion and another tool will lead to another. So then we have the compounding of the problem presented by the profusion of formats. By 1995, there were over 50 videotapes formats that had enjoyed some degree of use and popularity since 1956. And these formats, analog and digital, required specific playback machinery and expertise, all of which rapidly become obsolete in a competitive consumer environment where manufacturers and users abandon an old unpopular format for newer technologies. And so format obsolescence is equally as worrisome as the physical deterioration of tape. It is a type of decay. So collections managers are inheriting tape libraries of unknown age, decay, and format, not to mention poorly labeled and cataloged. I'm not going to talk about that very much here, and frankly mysterious. And then when we look at conservation, again, the tools to identify damaged tape, not really out there except for the visual inspection, and typical treatments such as baking, not well understood or described, unlike other conservation treatment actions that we might perform in other areas, such as paper conservation. So when we choose to wash paper, deacidify paper, we have a sense of what that process is about. When we choose to do any type of treatment action for deteriorated tapes, we don't. And so here is just a very small sampling of types of tapes that have been developed over the years. We have reel-to-reel tape. We have, so the reel-to-reel. We have 2 cassettes here, and then of course, very important cartridge type tape. Barry Manilow must be saved. So I think, so you can admire 4 of, and so this is an audio. This is audio, these are all video. And you can admire them while I continue on here. So we've had to collections managers deal with these multifaceted variables regarding physical deterioration, format obsolescence, and a lack of guidance with duplication or migration, and in the conservation of these collections. And so in the absence of tools and the threat of decay of valuable videotape and audio tapes, basically collections management plans currently focus primarily on duplication or migration. It's also known as migration to digital formats. There are very few people who are now migrating to analog formats, to some sort of digital format or computer hard drives. And, you know, basically those areas also offer few comforts in terms of their own studied longevity. And that also all of this duplication comes at great cost. So, deterioration of magnetic media is acknowledged as real and present, and we have been trying to, since then, come up with some solutions for what happens when does sticky shed occur and why. And since the 1980s, so the laboratories that I showed in the very first slide with the bibliography have used artificial aging, high heat and humidity, or combinations of pollutant gases to replicate deterioration. Once these laboratories had a deteriorated tape, they looked at the binder using a number of analytical techniques such as Fourier, transform infrared spectroscopy, high pressure liquid chromatography. They would extract and distill the tape fractions or the polymers that came off of the tape, or they would do viscosity measurements. And frequently the outcome of those tests would be to find that artificial aging didn't mimic what happens in real time. For instance, it seemed impossible to reproduce sticky shed as described and observed by users of the medium in this laboratory environment. And furthermore, the analytical techniques did not consistently reveal a correlation between deterioration and readability. That 12% binder issue that I will bring up yet again. As a result, the best that an archivist can do is to follow the National Media Laboratory's 1995 prediction that magnetic media stored under good circumstances will last from 10 to 30 years. There's the landscape. So let's talk a little bit more about the structure and materials of magnetic media. Since it was invented in the late 1940s, or brought to this country and used in audio recordings since the late 1940s, there have been many variations in the size, composition, and recording format of these materials. But in general, they all have the same basic structure: a stable polyester base, support base, and a matrix or emulsion of polyester urethane. or a polyester urethane elastomer, which is known as the binder, which is embedded with magnetic particles, which is known as the pigment. So here's your base, and here is your binder and pigment. In addition, the binder may contain lubricants, adhesives, and stabilizers. In many tapes, there's also a back coat consisting of the binder without any pigment. The purpose of the binder, of the back coat, is to provide the necessary friction to permit regular passage of the tape at high speeds through the tape recording or playback device. So according to Cudahy in 1980, magnetic particles take up approximately 20% weight per volume of the tape, and polymers constitute the remaining 80%. So the entire tape, the oxide, these little round bits in the artist's representation, are take up 20% of the weight, and the polymer 80%. And then if you just look at the pigment and binder, the volume is approximately 40% metal oxide, 40% polyester urethane, and 20% pores. The pores serve to eliminate adhesion of the tape surface to the recording head, and they also permit and the downside of that is that they permit the diffusion of oxygen, water, and environmental contaminants into the binder layer. So the base, the polyester, is considered stable unless it is subjected to very high temperatures, for instance, such as 90 degrees Celsius, where it would undergo irreversible shrinkage, making a tape unreadable. Some research, or the role of magnetic particles, or the magnetizable metal in deterioration has been studied. The loss of magnetic signal through heat, intentional or unintentional exposure to another magnetic field, for instance, to erase a tape or to alter the track of the recording, or perhaps through corrosion of the particles, has been studied. Only in the case of a particular type of tape known as metal particle tape is this last cause a real factor. That's this tape. Manufacturers corrected this problem with a new formulation of metal particles in the mid-1990s on. Metal particle actually dates only from the early 1990s, and so there's a period of time from about I think about 1991, throughout that first year or two, where it was slightly unstable. Edge in 1993 had suggested that metal particles could contribute or catalyze hydrolytic mechanisms leading to magnetic media deterioration, but this work was experimental. A conclusive link between chromium dioxide and in magnetic media and deterioration was established in the early 1980s, and effective methods of reducing or eliminating this problem once it was discovered was quickly developed by manufacturers. Most tapes are manufactured, however, from gamma ferric oxide or a variant, and these metal particles are considered fairly stable. The most stable oxide here is barium ferrite. Lubricants, the little blue diamonds. Lubricants, adhesives, and stabilizers are a relatively small portion of the tape composition, and they are typically lost through abrasion or evaporation, which means that they can no longer perform their function in the matrix. In these cases, friction between the tape and the reading head might increase and could possibly result in scraping of the tape surface and loss of binder and pigment. Or adhesives might migrate and interfere with proper tracking of the tape, or in the case of stabilizers, once they are used up, they can't slow down the deterioration of the binder. But they are considered very minor factor in overall deterioration. So it is generally understood that the primary chemical cause of magnetic media failure is through the deterioration of the polyester urethane binder. The polymer consists of a soft polyester and hard polyurethane segments. The main deterioration mechanism is known as hydrolysis, whereby the soft polyester undergoes a chemical change in the presence of water and heat to produce low molecular weight carboxylic acids, which migrate to the surface of the tape and cause it to become tacky and increase stiction. So basically at this linkage, or sometimes at the nitrogen linkage, but definitely at the double bond oxygen linkage, you find that the link will break, creating smaller chains. So the tape becomes tacky, increases stiction, the result is sticky shed. It's interesting, or for me, it's just interesting to note that polyester urethane is considered relatively unstable chemically. So we've always acknowledged that it's not a stable chemical. And because it has a fairly large surface area, it really is subject to agents of deterioration. Okay, finally, the subject of my talk. So we've established what it is that causes sticky shed, and now the question is, what are we going to do about it? In the mid-1990s, Mary T. Baker, formerly a research chemist at the Smithsonian Institution Center for Materials Research and Education, determined that minute changes in the binder of deteriorated videotapes could be detected with Fourier transform infrared microscope with an attenuated total reflectance attachment. And so for those people who run one of these machines, you know what I'm talking about. And for the rest of you, who cares, right? This is just, it just sounds really fancy. The initial results of this research seem to indicate that this technique might be a way to take an analytical snapshot of tapes to determine if they were deteriorating. If you could get a spectrum that said this is what a deteriorated tape looks like, and then you could sort of compare it against other spectra. Mary was cautiously optimistic that this technique could be used on collections of videotapes of various ages and formats to flag which ones needed to be restored immediately and which ones could wait. That would have been great. The initial results of her experiments was published in Lifetime Predictions for Polyurethane-Based Recording Media Binders, right here. And unfortunately, further data using more tightly controlled subjects showed that this technique was still too crude to look at the binder to determine if it had actually deteriorated. Basically, the FTIR would have needed a before aging snapshot of that particular tape taken a decade or more earlier to be able to see a change. Mary did use the technique to analyze tapes that had been surface cleaned using a high-speed mechanical restoration technique involving non-woven polyester, and I participated in that research with her. Some tapes prior to reformatting can be put on a machine that runs them by friction, cleans them off, and removes dust and debris from the surface of the tape. So when we looked at uncleaned and clean tapes, we determined that there were no detectable changes in chemical composition before or after cleaning. And this small sample of research, this small sample is the only research, as far as I know, that's ever been done on cleaning techniques used by restorers of magnetic media. And I gave the results of this small study at the 1998 Electronic Media Group at the American Institute for Conservation annual meeting. Later in 1997, Mary took advantage of an opportunity to use an atomic force microprobe, or an AFM, instrument at Howard University here in Washington. Compared to other instruments like a scanning electron microscope, AFM is more sophisticated and can actually look at binders or other organic polymers. SEM can't really see polyurethane because carbon is a low molecular weight element, and SEM isn't set up to do that. AFM, however, is a profilometry technique where the probe mimics the surface it is examining. The image that is produced shows great detail of the surface characteristics of the material. The atomic force microprobe uses various forces that occur when two objects are brought within nanometers of each other. And AFM can work either when the probe is actually in contact with the surface, which causes a repulsive force, or when it is a few nanometers away where the force is attractive. And scanning the surface creates a three-dimensional image. So, Even though the purpose of this exercise was to look at the binder, something very interesting happened under AFM. Several videotapes were examined, cleaned and uncleaned tapes, and tapes known to have sticky shed. Uncleaned and sticky shed tapes had a very rugged surface with high peaks corresponding to the magnetized particles. Cleaned videotape had a compressed and smooth surface. So, artist rendering Mary basically drew it out on a cocktail napkin, and I replicated here for you. So if you have an unclean tape or a sticky shed, a tape that we think has deterioration, you see, looking at it from the side or sort of at a 3/4 angle, you see these rugged peaks, and then what you see afterwards is a much smoother surface. The question was, why are there such rough surfaces on the old, unclean videotapes? Mary hypothesized that the pigment, gamma ferric oxide in this case, had hydrated. Now, understand that pigment has never been seriously considered the bad actor in magnetic media deterioration research projects. Pigment is supposed to be fairly stable. Mary suggested that what she saw under AFM is that the metal particles are enlarged, possibly engorged. It is possible for the oxide to absorb water. These hydrated forms are expanded, much the same way that a sponge absorbs water. It does not change the chemical nature of the particle, just its size, thus it is not technically rust. So if the metal is expanding, it will affect the adhesion between the particles and the binder. The clean tape appeared to compress the enlarged particles and knock off friable polyurethane that would otherwise fall into the heads of the videotape machines. And I think this is very interesting. Mary did not see that it had knocked off parts of the pigment, that it had only knocked off parts of the binder. The clean tapes look similar to freshly manufactured tapes, and you should know that in manufacture of videotapes, the tapes are run through a calendaring process. They're under enormous weight and pressure to have an extremely smooth surface. And that's very important as part of the feature of tape, which is so necessary and desirable, is that it have extremely close contact with the tape recording head. So you have your tape and the tape recording head. They have to have perfect contact. So the smoother the tape is, the better it would be. So clean tapes look similar to freshly manufactured tapes. And anecdotally, and this is where, one shouldn't repeat anecdote in an audience like this, but this is what a lot of magnetic media deterioration research seems to be, seems to work around, is that clean tapes actually seem to play back better than unclean tapes. So Mary's research was preliminary, and these provocative examinations did not lead to any additional conclusions at SCMRE or elsewhere, and unfortunately, Mary did not publish or complete this work, and she left the field. So no one at SCMRE or elsewhere has pursued her work. And I gave an introductory explanation of this research at the Association of Moving Image Archivists in 1999. There have been some, I think in the last 10 years, some very heartening improvements in standards and guidelines for magnetic media collections. In 1999, I introduced the video identification website with Paul Messier, videoid.com, as a new tool for collections managers who needed to understand what type of videotape media they had. This tool was help the archivists identify the format and make collections management decisions based on a format's obsolescence. If you don't know how deteriorated it is, at least you can say, well, there are no more machines left, so I better get this format migrated. And I proposed an obsolescence rating for each type of videotape. from extinct to lower risk. And these are my definitions. For extinct, only 1 or 2 playback machines may exist at specialist laboratories. The tape itself is more than 20 years old. Sort of like animals in a zoo kind of thing. And lower risk, this format will be used over the next 5 years. Well, I haven't updated this website since 1990, not since 2000, so I need to do that, obviously. But the whole notion of an obsolescence or a risk rating intrigued members of the Society for Motion Picture and Television Engineers, who couldn't believe that anyone would pronounce a 2-inch quad extinct when it had been introduced a mere 45 years ago. So, and of course, these are my subjective measurements. So there are people who would say, well, that's just not true. This is, there are more machines out there, more people are using this. But again, shows photograph. This is that summer I spent at VidiPax at all those different types of tapes. Several other guides have been produced by nonprofit groups. Let me go back to here first. No, I'm gonna go over to here. Several other guides have been produced, and this is not a comprehensive list, but provides a sense of the kind of advocates for media preservation that have been here in the States. The Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers updated its recommended practice, RP 103, in 1995, entitled Care, Storage, Operation, Handling, and Shipping of Magnetic Recording Tape for Television. And this has since been superseded by the ISO standard, which I will talk about in a moment. In 1997, the Library of Congress issued a report authored by the former head of Motion Picture Broadcast and Recorded Sound from the National Archives, Bill Murphy, entitled Television and Video Preservation, 1997, which offered problems and some solutions for us to work on. The Association of Moving Image Archivists has an online resource authored by Jim Wheeler, a longtime engineer with Ampex, an advocate for preservation. And that's at amianet.org. The Bay Area Video Coalition, BAVAC as it's known, produced an interactive DVD describing the restoration process and some of the deterioration problems experienced by videotapes, which was following up on they did that in 2003, and this was following up on a 1996 publication called Playback, a preservation primer for video. Similarly, Independent Media Arts Preservation, or IMAP, has a useful website devoted to videotape preservation. And finally, and what I'm referring to right here is Mona Jimenez, who created the Video Conservation Guide in 2004 for the Texas Commission on the Arts. And this has, in this very elegantly designed website, has, in my mind, the most comprehensive approach to identifying problems and suggesting solutions for videotape collections. And I can give any of you, if you want me to give you the URLs for any of these, I can do that afterwards. The International Standards Organization has one standard on storage practices, ISO 18932, 23. Imaging materials, magnetic media storage practices issued in 2002, and a draft standard on storage and handling, 18933. The draft was issued in 2003 and is almost ready to be accepted. It's undergoing review still at this point. And it is disappointing to look at these standards and recognize that there's been no substantial scientific research done since von Bogart's 95 publication. For both standards, the bibliography is short and lists research from 1967 through 1995. And the mysteries still remain. Why in both standards can't magnetic media be frozen? And again, the lubricant, they describe in a little bit more detail. They say lubricant loss is the explanation, but that is not from published research. So it's not something that it's perhaps members of the committee simply wanted to keep that. The emphasis on, there's again a very strong emphasis on visual analysis in the storage and handling document, the 2003 document. And this emphasis, for me, seems like an extremely labor-intensive activity with likely little repeatable or meaningful results. And I base this statement on surveys that I myself have performed on videotapes, where visual examination has never clearly led to a diagnosis of sticky shed. But the establishment of standards is a really important landmark for materials, and certainly with magnetic media, where anecdote and trade practice have become de facto method of preservation, these standards are most welcome. I just want to highlight briefly 2 areas of research that are current and ongoing and focus on magnetic media. At the National Institute of Standards and Technology and at the Image Permanence Institute, we see very different projects, but both have the potential to change the way we view magnetic media preservation. NIST's Magnetic Technology Division in Boulder, Colorado, has been seeking ways to non-destructively duplicate the magnetic pulse of magnetic media to recreate the track in a computer model. Ostensibly, this technique would then permit a tape to be readable without subjecting it to a playback machine, which would be a similar, well, in my view, I don't know very much about it, would be similar to perhaps to, say, the IRENE project, which is now being conducted here and at the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory. This technique, the NIST's technique, is in its infancy, and I understand that experimenters were hopeful that this technology might be used to examine the 18.5-minute gap of the Watergate tapes. However, the National Archives determined that at this time there were no viable technologies for getting understandable audio from erased tapes, although they could see that it definitely had been erased in that microscopic way. And the Image Permanence Institute is in the midst of an NEH-funded project to try to create a litmus strip for magnetic deterioration. A little strip of paper. They've produced something now called an acid detection strip. This would be similar. It's a little strip of paper. You would put it into your cassette or your reel-to-reel, close it up for 24 hours, and when you opened it up, the little strip of paper would change to a different color, and that would say, reformat it now. And I can report that many of the concerns that I've raised here are being confirmed in this research project. First of all, collections managers still don't know what they have. They don't know what they've got, what they have format-wise. They don't know how old they are, and they have no idea what their deterioration status is. And then, so that it's very difficult for IPI to sort of know who their customer is going to be. And then tapes that have been aged artificially at the Image Permanence Institute have behavior all over the map. That's a direct quote. And lastly, finding real-life samples that are of poor quality, and we're talking a large enough volume of real-life samples, continues to be difficult for the lab. It's perhaps because these are collections that people don't want to give up to, medical research, as it were. So, where are we now? So in 1995, these were our answers. And here are my questions still. So we still don't have a test to determine end of life for tapes. In addition, I need to re-emphasize, if I haven't, that there really is no survey tool that accurately prioritizes deterioration for tape. You can do format obsolescence, but that doesn't necessarily capture those weird years of chromium dioxide tapes, for instance. To store at 59 degrees and 40% relative humidity, the ISO guidelines are a little bit more extensive, and they indicate a 10-year medium storage and a 50-year storage limit. And in both of those cases, the tolerances for the 10-year are much broader, and for 50 years, they have added the issue of pollution controls. but there are still very general warnings about temperatures below 46 degrees Fahrenheit. Baking is still advocated for, and people still do it. And there has not been any research on treatment protocol or the process, so that at-risk tapes still, yes, we may be able to get the information off, but we haven't been able to determine if that's going to be good for the tape in the long run. And there hasn't been any research on quality of playback, so that even if we have determined that a tape that has some physical sign that it's got a problem, we still haven't sort of established what the benchmark in a published form, what is acceptable for good quality playback, and that includes things like connoisseurship. So a tape, we can't expect a tape that was made in 1972 to have the same crispness or color saturation as a tape that was recorded in 1990, unless the tape recorded in 1990 was poorly recorded. But that's I'm sort of fleshing out the whole issue of quality of playback. So we need a litmus test for determining sticky shed. We need standards for handling tapes in a conservation setting: examination, documentation, proper migration. And I'm not saying that there aren't that some institutions haven't established them within their own institutional process, but broadly speaking, we need those standards. We need to study baking and other restoration techniques. I just threw in the universal playback machine. I think it's the fantasy that we would be able to like have one machine that could do it all, and so that we wouldn't have to worry about obsolescence. And I didn't. It's always good to add something at the very end of your talk that I hadn't mentioned the entire rest of the time. But it would be really useful for us to study mold on tapes, because for years people have been collections managers have been complaining about mold, or what is that growing on the tape. And this is one of these cases where people say, well, consult a conservator. And we don't know what it is, what is the proper protocol for handling those types of tapes and so forth. So I hope that this talk has been provocative and useful to you today. And I would like to close with the following acknowledgments for the people who've helped me on this interesting road with magnetic media preservation. Thanks very much. And I'd be pleased to take questions.
Do you offhand know of anyone who has bothered to freeze tapes and find out what happened?
Not offhand.
That's insane.
Well, I remember when I asked the question to a panel talking about audio that was talking about the issues. Actually, Alan Lewis was on this panel back in 1997, I think, at the National Archives. They had a panel. Mark Russa, who was a former chief here and preservation director, was sitting on that panel too. And I said, well, why can't you freeze it? And my understanding is that basically the problem is that all of the tape manufacturers have different formulations, just slightly different formulations, so that some tape manufacturers probably would be fine with their tapes being frozen, but other manufacturers or particular brand wouldn't be fine because of this issue potentially of the lubricant coming out. Now maybe there should be a test for determining whether or not the lubricant was in that tape and whether or not you could do it. But
I don't understand how lubricant is going to come out when you freeze the tape.
it supposedly crystallized and migrates to the surface. So, yeah.
Sarah, with regard to that question,
Mm-hmm.
I'm totally passing luck here because I should be able to know the answer, for which reason I'm not going to tell you who I am. But I believe that the image permanence Institute did some testing and freezing of videotapes before they came out with Uralstein's newest of 3 guides.
Oh, right. I didn't mention that particular.
The sort of multimedia storage guide
Mhm.
includes recommendations for magnetic tape that steer you away from freezing, and I'm pretty sure it's based on testing that they did.
Oh,
magnetic tape industry hasn't done a similar study to what Kodak did. It's published, and you can look at it. It's peer reviewed, and you can make that judgment. So it's a real catch-22. You have to find and evaluating a tape in terms of what has happened to it is also very hard. Is it better for it to be frozen or not? So it's a conundrum.
Well, a lot of the tape manufacturers have ceased to manufacture tape, and so it's not their problem anymore. So, yeah. Let me go to Alan.
Touching on the issue of quality control, if one is doing quality control on videotape by looking at an image on the monitor, you have to think about, and following up on something Sarah said, at the point that those images were recorded, not only the technology, but the lighting in the studio. Because back in the 50s and 60s, we were lighting studios at about 250-foot candles, very flat, to create a usable image with image orthicon tubes. As the tubes got better, we began going to more photographic, more revealing key light, fill light, backlight, and that sort of thing. So even the production elements involved in recording the tape, having nothing to do with technology, has a bearing on what the image looks like on the screen.
Right, so connoisseurship. If you don't know what a television program from the late 60s should look like, and then you're going to reformat it, and you're going to fiddle with all of the different skew and brightness and things I don't know about, you need to be aware of that. Walter?
Has anyone thought of, I mean, given that the industry is no longer producing tape, it's producing many of the, most of the tapes that we're concerned about.
Mm-hmm.
Has anyone thought of contacting them and saying, we want to do serious studies, we're stuck with preserving these, can't you just give us the recipes so we can find out what these were made, how these were made? I mean, what would it, what impact would it have on the industry, I think, not a time.
Well, Alan,
In my
answer?
case, it may set them up for liability.
Yeah.
So it's another 18 and a half or whatever.
Yeah.
Because 3M is still in business, or they're not making magnetic tape anymore. And Intex is still in business, or they're not making magnetic tape anymore.
And also, yeah.
Question for the legal.
Well, and it's also like,
It's either the lawyers or the accountants.
you know, I think that, you know, there might have been, you know, even on a daily basis in the factory that's manufacturing this, you know, you're making chocolate cake today, maybe you're going to add a little bit more sugar, and then you're going to add a little bit more salt, or, you know, a little more baking soda. So there's always the possibility that even with your general, and I don't know what the total output is, but I just feel like there was enough sort of industry leeway to be able to have a lot of different tape formats out there, just composition-wise, that might have an implication. So, let me go to Jeff, and then I'll go back there.
So is there indeed the phenomenon of mold on tape?
Well, for a long time, I said that that just couldn't possibly be because mold isn't going to be interested in eating, in eating polyurethane. I mean, what's there? What's the food? But Bob Kessler and I had a discussion. He said SCMRE, and he said, well, it's porous, and so the tape is porous. So there's places for the mold to go. Mold is very tenacious, and you've got lubricants and you have adhesives, and those sorts of things might be tasty. So I don't. So those are things. But and I have some moldy tapes. I'd be happy to give them to anybody who wants to look at them. I.
No, I asked because we recently, acquired a collection of tapes from a particular individual who attempted to have them reformatted, and the individual who took one look at the tapes and said, "Oh no, these have mold on tapes. Consult a conservative."
Right.
And I looked at the tapes, and maybe out of 15 or 20 tapes, maybe there were maybe 2 or 3 that just from a visual inspection seemed to have some dodgy white stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Little discrete specks.
Mm-hmm.
That's the beginning and the end of it.
Well, it's not just in videotape that we need to have better protocol for dealing with mold. I think all other items that may receive mold, there needs to be safety issues need to be taken care of, but the standards for dealing, culturing the mold or whatever you need to do, just getting a mycologist involved or whatever, those sorts of, that type of procedure needs to be, looked into and written up and so on. And back.
How much of the recommendations that you give for storage of videotape applies to audio?
All of them.
It does?
Yes, it really is the same stuff. I would maybe with the addition that especially early audio tape probably needs to definitely be in an environment where they can't have, nothing can affect the magnetic. In other words, they need to be on grounded shelves. They shouldn't be on shelves that could potentially affect the magnetism. And there's some handling issues, especially with audio tape, in terms of making sure that they're properly wound and so forth. But those sorts of guidelines are actually available. In fact, I think the Library of Congress has, the 1957 Lemko and Pickett publication on audio. Am I quoting it correctly? I mean, that's a fantastic publication. 1957, though, people. We have a lot of things that we need to be doing. So, yeah.
Sarah, what are the current recommendations for migration, as a preservation plan, migration implications?
Current,
You said
right.
we're no longer migrating to magnetic tape.
Right. Well, no, they're migrating primarily to digital, but some of that digital could be on tape. So because magnetic media formats are both analog and digital, so a lot of collections are still duplicating onto, for instance, digital Betacam. I wonder if I have one in here. Okay, but so the issue there is that they have to decide whether or not they want to have a compressed, if it's all right for a compressed format. Sometimes they're making several copies. They're making a digital Betacam for their preservation master and then a VHS copy. But people are also going deeply into the DVD world, especially for access. But that's not the only. There are other up until for a long time, 1-inch SMPTE Type C, which is a reel-to-reel format, was considered the preservation master format, and I don't think it is anymore. Because I don't think that. Walter?
The current wisdom is that institutions should think seriously about keeping whatever original format, quote, the original format is when they migrate. The original format is tape, and you reach the point of extinction. What is an institution supposed to do with something that literally can't be played on anything anymore? Especially quads take up a lot of space, and they're pretty bad.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, what do you do? I don't know. This is the kind of question that troubles me every day. If you have a duplicate, right? Well, I mean, deaccessioning something that you feel that you can't play back is definitely, it's within the realm of possibility. If you feel you cannot play it back. But you're sort of saying, well, we have a solution. I don't know.
Well, I mean, there are means by which now that they can get signals off of broken discs by not playing them back, but by scanning the grooves and sort of repiecing it together. Who's to say in 5 or 10 or 15 years you can't do the same thing with a tape by looking at it and not
Right.
playing it back, but by looking at the magnetic track and then sort of putting those
Well, right. But I totally agree. Who's to say? I mean, I don't see anybody really actively pursuing this research for the collections care community. So if you have to go to your director and say, well, I need to continue to store these 2-inch quads that are taking up, the wing of the building, because there might be some research that shows we can play them back. I mean, that might not fly. I think that's a real concern for me, not seeing active research being conducted in the field. That's where that is. Yeah.
And just to continue that same thought, if you use photography as a model, the discovery that
Mhm. Go ahead.
Two things. You mentioned research at NIST in Boulder.
Yeah.
And so just for your plug, we're going to try to have David Thomas, who's
Oh,
running
good.
that research, as a speaker sometime this next year. So we'll be back in touch to let you folks know about that. But I had a question about you said you could, the sticky shed shows up on audio tape.
Mhm.
With squeal. So how does it show up in the playback of, say, a VHS tape? Is it
You would
video or
you would see it, for instance, if you're at home and you're looking at your wedding videotapes, you would begin to see, well, assuming you have a clean tape player, you might begin to see dropouts. So flashes of white would be an indication that you are losing binder. If the tape refuses to progress through the tape player, you definitely have sticky shed. And so if any of you have had that experience recently, you should definitely reformat that tape if you possibly can. But yeah, the dropouts are a clear, especially if you're not looking at the head and you're not looking at the machinery as it's working. So, yeah.
Two questions.
Yeah.
The first one is the computer industry and all the magnetic media that they use.
Mhm.
Are they not having sticky shed problems? And if they are, what are they doing about it?
I know that the University of Alabama, I think at Birmingham, has a really major media laboratory that I don't know very much about what they've been doing. And I haven't heard of sticky shed on magnetic media, but that I don't know. I do know that if we wanted to, we could go and take a look at what they're doing at the University of Alabama. I do know the National Media Laboratory is no longer looking at from 1995 has not been looking at magnetic media. They moved on to different stuff since their publication. So that's not really an answer, but that's all I know about it.
And the second part of
Yeah,
the question
sorry.
is about sticky shed,
Mhm.
the alternatives of baking.
Right.
Jim Wheeler is a big advocate of using desiccants and putting tapes in a room or in a space. Of course,
That's actually my idea. So this is the problem when things don't get published or peer reviewed.
I heard
Yeah.
from Jim Wheeler.
I know. I'm sure he did. I'm sure you did. That's fine. I mean, absolutely. Let's not expose our tapes to heat. Let's put them into a bag with a desiccant gel for a period of time. If the desiccant has been, conditioned to 10% relative humidity or 5%. And I know he's a fan of it. And does he actually have some examples that it's where it's worked? As far as you know.
At AES a couple years ago.
Right.
And he didn't have examples at that time, but I
Right.
don't know if he's done it since. I really, what I was looking for was for you to talk for a minute about alternatives to baking.
Right. So why expose something that you only may be able to get one recording off of? Why expose it to high heat, which could potentially also increase or accelerate degradation reactions? So the idea might be that instead of using high heat and low humidity, just to use low humidity. And so to condition your tape over a period of time, I don't know how long it would take, to low humidity environment so for instance, in a Marvel seal package, much like people use right now to move things in and out of a cold or cool storage. They use some sort of package system to make sure that there's no condensation. But these are vapor lock bags, basically, that you can put your tape into. You would put a desiccant in there. And that might, the idea of dehydrating the spongy oxide, maybe that would work. Two issues. One is you'd still have to clean the tape because it would probably then have a lot of friable material on the surface when the moisture had been drawn out. Three issues. I don't know how you would get the tape pack. I mean, there's been a lot of studies on how the tape pack, how moisture diffuses through the tape pack and not, similar to some film research. So I don't know how effective it would be, say, for the inner layer or for a cassette tape. And there was a third issue. So so you'd have to clean it, and you'd have to recondition it back to a somewhat humid state, because you can't play back a tape in a low humidity environment. The static electricity generated would cause a lot of dropouts. So you'd have to bring it back to over 30% relative humidity before you could play it back. I don't think that would necessarily mean that for instance, that you would be rehydrating anything or accelerating it, but when you've brought it down to a very low relative humidity, you do need to bring it back up to a slightly more friendly environment to play it back. So those are some thoughts. Other alternatives to baking, well, I mean, cleaning using this non-woven Pellon system seems to be a very good way, at least, of getting your tape playable, but at least non-sticky, at least for a while. Maybe there's some heat in the friction that's driving off moisture, but that hasn't been studied either. The chemical change, there hasn't been, the FTIR analysis showed that there wasn't a chemical change, which we think is good, but we don't know what physical changes there may have been that might be bad with cleaning. So those are the only cleaning using this non-woven polyester or baking are really the only things I know. I don't know anything about solvent use. I mean, I don't know if you could put it in a solvent that would drive off moisture and if that would do anything. You know, I'm not familiar with I don't know any other tools of the trade. Yes?
They just mentioned at the Oslo conference, Lars Dusted, who was at the National Norwegian Library, that also putting things into cold storage, putting sticky shit tape into cold storage would reverse sticky shit. I didn't get a follow-up on that. So
Mhm.
you know anything about that, or anything about that?
Actually reversing the sticky shed, what they said?
Fine, but I should have followed up with a question on that. But that sounded too easy.
Well, I mean, and then you have the problem of what happens to the lubricant and if that's going to be a major factor in your being able to play it back. But it's if it was reversible, that would be great. But I haven't seen that happen in conservation ever. I mean, just sorry, I'm going to go.
I work for the Advanced Heritage Foundation.
Uh-huh.
I'm part of it.
Yeah, hello.
And I may be the only person here that doesn't want to go back to Congress. So we're in a really different position. And it seems as if all the research you're talking about is on analog media, not on digital media. And we're one of the few places, perhaps, that is still recommending migration to analog to analog.
Mhm.
We're still doing, helping dance collections migrate Betacam SCP because we talked to Jim Linder and other people in the field who said, well, for the next 5 or 10 years, we're probably still okay with Betacam SCP. And digital media, there's been no research on that, except that a lot of times that gets damaged.
Mhm.
Really easily. So if we tell people who own dance collections go over to digital, that may be creating all kinds of new problems. At least we know what the old problems are, and Betacam SP is somewhat stable until something better comes along, like JPEG 2000 or whatever we had Jim Linder do his research project
Mhm.
to migrate analog to digital in the dance field in particular.
Mhm.
We don't want things compressed.
Right.
You're talking about dance.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, people are all going to digital. Is that creating new problems of deterioration and, handling that weren't even mentioned in these other research projects?
Well, I should say that the magnetic tape storage and handling actually was addressing the newest generation of digital media, like the D1s, D2s. These are formats that were relatively new in the early 90s. There is an excellent research project that was just published by NIST on CDs and DVDs. I think it was Fred Byers is the author of that. And for me, it's well, and so they're saying things like DVDs can last X amount of time. They go through, and CDs. They have an expectation that that media will last for a long period of time. And then you're getting into sort of, well, how do you get it there? And then if it's in this, some kind of format, how do you get it off eventually also? I think that, you don't want to put it into some proprietary format that you won't be able to read on a computer later on. But yeah, I mean, I think, when you have a 10 to 30 year window for the deterioration of the stuff, you might say, well, I can probably handle migrating 2 or 3 times, but when you're migrating in an analog world, you're getting generational loss. So, Betacam SP is a very good quality format, but it's not going to be around for a lot longer. I mean, I don't know. What do you think?
Sony recently circulated a press release indicating that they were producing fewer models in the SP product line, which begins to telegraph the beginning of the end for that format.
Said they're not going to reduce them.
Right. So. Right.
But there's still apparently enough machines around and enough tapes around that I'm told by a number of experts that feel that 5 to 10 years out, we're okay. In that period, we've got to figure out what's next. And obviously, we're talking about collection supply, by the time it's finished migrating.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's Jim Lindner has done some very interesting work, experimental work on an automated process for duplicating tapes that can actually monitor the process without the presence of a person there. Jim Lindner was the founder of VidiPax and has his own company called Media Matters, and is a very knowledgeable advocate for preservation of these materials. But when you're talking about little tiny, dance groups that have all their entire history on videotape, it's a problem. I mean, I think you would make decisions based on what you know. What's sad is when people make decisions based on what they don't know. I mean, are making decisions or they're not making, or the neglect issue. So, I'm hopeful that if people are migrating to, say, an analog format, that they're keeping tabs on it, and that in 5 and 10 years there will be some good format that they feel comfortable going to, or computer hard drives or robotics or whatever. So there's, hopefully in that area there will be enough developments to make collections managers feel comfortable. But, Robin?
Just to complete the original part of the question, the issue of preservation of the magnetic media that holds digital computer records is a non-issue because of exactly what you're saying. The migrating takes place so far ahead of the shelf life of the material. For instance, my first hard drive had 20 megabytes on it, and that was 20 years ago. That probably still would be good if it was still in anybody's interest to use a 20 megabyte hard drive that was the size of a loaf of bread.
Yeah. Actually, that's actually a better response than my sort of like, I don't know what's going on with with disks. I mean, basically the way that computer officers dealing with information technologies are dealing with issues of they're duplicating files over, and you're putting new tapes in all the time, so that they threw out last week's tape and they just they did it or they're backing up on tape systems where they're getting a new tape all the time. So they're one hopes. So that actually may not be as much of an issue. They're not sitting around on a 20-year-old tape, although I know that migration is a big issue, and for archiving that, and electronic records officers are having, I mean, bless them. I don't know what to do. So, Eric.
I'm just curious about the packaging. What happens to Barry Manilow's photograph?
Oh, sure. Well, and see, I think,
that forever? Is there
right.
protocol for this?
Well, and there isn't. That's, for me, is a very, I mean, there was, early on in my work with this, we had to reformat a Krispy Kreme employee manual that it was a video that was distributed to Krispy Kremes throughout the countries to show employees how to do make donuts. And it was beautiful. It was a polka dotted red cassette with the Krispy Kreme logo, and it's in a collection, and it has, that thing has intrinsic value, and it was delivered to the reformatter, who promptly lost the cassette housing because it wasn't, who cares about the cassette housing? Actually, they did find it. But I mean, the thing was, after half an hour of panic looking, we found that they had to remove the interior to get to the stuff to reformat it. If you don't have a sensitivity to that issue, to materials, if you don't view these materials as being important or somehow different than other collections, then that's what's going to happen. So the need for conservators, for people who have our sensitivity, is really important, because, and I don't think that the engineers and technicians want to be left alone at their own devices to sort of figure this out. I think that they want to know whether or not, the Krispy Kreme box is important. I think that they would like to know, but they'd also, I think that there's levels of, photographing a cassette tape and doing a before and after photograph isn't going to do you any good, right? It's not, that's completely superfluous. So there has to be, what's the process? So, Walter.
Last question I'll ask everyone. Just Barry and the Krispy Kreme people they're on this plastic.
Mm-hmm.
And the plastic, I don't know if there has been any conclusion of this discussion.
Right.
Plastic,
Yeah.
which is probably not the best.
It's not so bad, but I can't remember what it is right now.
I just haven't seen
Some of it is polyvinyl chloride. It's hard plastic, but the worst housings that I've seen, some tapes do have sort of there's a half-inch open reel, and sort of here is just the. Let's see if there's a picture of it. Aha, indeed. Its case had this sort of soft vinyl cover, and it just gets really sticky and gross. You don't want to touch the case, much less what's inside it. But I haven't found that the only time that I've seen housing get messed up is when it was put on the dashboard of my car and subjected to, a lot of heat. But I don't know if there's anybody who's had experience with the housings actually deteriorating. And so there's a question in the back, yeah.
My question is on, I was wondering if any work has been done on the care of the playback machines themselves, and how much time you should put into, and expense you should put into cleaning the machines themselves. For example, your 1-inch machine, you have 1 inch dusty, maybe moldy,
Yeah.
some crystalline residue on them, and put it in a 1-inch machine, and slide gets in there, the next 1 inch on there, and how that fourth one down the line might have.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Dust and dirt on it as the.
Right.
If there's any standard for, you can't obviously clean it after every use, but.
Yeah.
What kind of.
Well, no. I mean, basically, you would think that if you went to a reputable company that specialized in reformatting, that they would maintain their machines as much as, because it's a capital investment for them, as much as you don't want to contaminate tapes. Vidipacks used to make a big deal about cleaning their machines every time that they, between playing back machines, playing back tapes. But in terms of a guideline, sure, it makes complete sense for us to weigh in, the cultural community to weigh in and say, valuable tapes should have, they should always be put on a machine that's been cleaned and so on, without a damaged head and that kind of thing. And what we're getting to really is that these machines are becoming museum artifacts. And some of them are at American history in their technology department. Of course, we don't use them for reformatting, and they don't have all of the machines anyway. The expertise to run those machines and the again, the sensitivity, the engineers who understand, how to make this baby work, is we're losing that, and that's a big concern to me. As where's the new generation of people who will be able to run these antique machines if we have as many tapes as we say we do, and we do have as many tapes as we say we do, that need to be reformatted. How many hours of engineer time? How many? And what's the procedure? But if you don't get support for that kind of protocol, I want to clean my machine every time I put a tape on it. If that isn't important because of what other factor, I think that's a problem. But no, there hasn't been any, as far as I know, there isn't like a manual out there for the restoration manual. And I use the word restoration because I think it hasn't quite yet, that sort of seems to be the word that fits it best. Yeah.
I know mainly with audio tapes, so I can speak to video, but my experience that sticky shed occurs primarily on back-coated tapes. But I was
I've heard that too.
if it occurs exclusively on back-coated tapes.
I don't know. I mean, see, that's where, well, that would be a great place for somebody to pick up some research, compare back-coated tapes to non-back-coated tapes, but, and even identifying tape, maybe what you thought had back coating isn't really back coated. I mean, but I just sort of to say that there, what is it about this observation that you've had that would lead to some really interesting research questions? And, I think audio tape is the place to start too in many respects because it just seems to me that there's a lot of other complicating factors with some videotape, and I think it's easier. I think it would be better to start with audio tapes to get your basic idea. I think that first of all, we've been able to figure out with the squeal, we know the squeal on audio tapes, we've been able to identify sticky shed more easily than with videotapes. So I think that you could probably have a pool of tapes that had sticky shed in the audio realm, and I think that if somebody were to look at tapes, if they were to select a tape, they would probably want to use an open reel audio tape as what they were looking at. But let me just make sure there was somebody over here, and then Nora. Hello. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Right. Actually, that a very interesting issue. Some tape cleaning machines have some sort of laser that actually looks at the edge of the tape to see how often it has folds or deformities. And then it sort of tells you, you've cleaned the tape, and it tells you on a scale of, it gives you little red lights. And the number of red lights you get tell you how bad off it is, supposedly. In my view, that is sort of a bells and whistles thing that they added to tapes because there didn't seem to be then a correlation between that deformity and the playback ultimately. But it is interesting because I think it's, I don't know if it's shining a light on, or if it's feeling, I don't know exactly how the sensor works in these tape cleaning machines, but basically it just, the light goes up and then you're like, okay, well that's a 6, and I don't know what that means really. And these tape cleaning machines were developed by the data industry for cleaning data tapes, and then have been modified to be used on videotapes, and I imagine in the audio world too. So, but it would be really interesting to look. I mean, somewhere in there, some microscopic way of looking at the tape might have the clue that we need to be able to say, but what we need to know. That's really a good point. Yes, Larry.
Not all audio tapes of squeal have steep shift.
Oh.
And you have to be careful about that because sometimes there are other problems that come up, and if you bake them,
Mm-hmm.
it can actually make the problem worse.
Right.
So
And yeah, I would say the
very important note.
yeah.
People want to just think that, oh, I hear a squeal, I'm going to bake it, and I'm solving the problem. No. So that's the first thing. The second thing is about maintaining tape decks.
Mm-hmm.
I'm involved with the Audio Engineering Society, and there are some very good standards committees, AES,
Okay.
that have guidelines
Okay.
on how to maintain tape decks. Now, those are obviously audio decks, but a lot of times the technology is very similar.
Mm-hmm.
I think any
Thank you.
reputable archive
Yeah.
will clean a tape deck after every use.
Mhm.
That's a standard. That's
Mhm.
a kind of no-brainer.
Mhm.
But there are other guidelines, and
Right.
if you look at the AES website, you can find them.
Yeah, and I just think that's a really, that's a really important point to make, is that this field actually requires a very broad knowledge of all the different types of groups that you might need to know about in broadcast and recorded sound and so forth. It's not just, conservators or scientists. These engineers, the people who've developed the materials, and you need to be aware of what they're doing, and it's really critical. And I hadn't looked at AES recently, so very interesting. I think I probably, can I take one more? Okay, one more. Okay, I'll do it.
Mine's just more of like a kind of a comment and it's based on the migration to digital question that was brought up, and that every people are going to digital. That's pretty much already been decided that everybody's doing it, and it seems like as you look back at the history of the archiving,
Mm-hmm.
there was a step missed in the migration to magnetic media. It involved new preservation research, and the fact that people should be starting to look into digital preservation research now instead of 40 years from now when it's already on. Who knows what's going to be going on?
Mm-hmm.
I think is a key point
Mm-hmm.
that people are looking back and wanting to, what are we going to do with this? They weren't doing that when they were first migrating it. So, I think the time has already begun for people to start delving into researching digital preservation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody. Sure. Yeah.
Two things. One, the chemical structure you showed
Right.
had nitrogen in it, and it comes into small carboxylic acids.
Yeah.
A lot of molds tend to require a certain amount of nitrogen.
Right.
Some of them eat small carboxylic acids. Second,
Oh, that's interesting.
you're aware of this.
I'm just about to say, what's interesting, of course, is that you probably received the jet on the basis.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.